All right, I think we'll just give it till, I guess right now it's 4:05, 5 after. So why don't we get started? And I just would like to start by saying thanks for coming. I know it's the pre-holiday season, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come to our virtual open house tonight for the 17th Street North Corridor Study. My name is Luke Champa. I'm an assistant transportation planner with the Fargo-Moorhead Metropolitan Council of Governments, also known as FM MetroCog or MetroCog. And we'll just begin with some introductions here quick of the project team, which consists of the City of Moorhead and MetroCog, who are collaborating on this project, and then the hired consultants, planning and engineering consultants, are Bolton and Mink, and their sub-consultant is Tool Design. So with no further ado, I will let Dan from MetroCog introduce himself as well.
Hi there, Dan Farnsworth with MetroCog. Thank you for joining us this evening.
And then why don't we go to the City of Moorhead? Looks like Robin's on.
Hi, I'm Robin Houston. I'm the city planner for the City of Moorhead, and I also happen to live in this neighborhood that we're studying.
Thanks, Robin. I think Jonathan Atkins from the city might pop on eventually. We'll just keep an eye out for him. Traffic engineer with the City of Moorhead. And then we will let's throw it over to the consultants to introduce themselves.
Hi, Cody Christensen, study team project manager with Bolton and Mink.
Hi there, my name is Jim Mertz. I'm also at Bolton and Mink, and I'm leading the public engagement for this project.
And hi, everybody. I'm Connor Cox with Tool Design, and I was involved with developing the concept alternatives that we'll walk through in a bit here.
All right, thanks. Our next item, I think we'll just talk about what MetroCog's role is on the project, and Dan will explain, what we do and why we're working with the City of Moorhead.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. So again, Dan here with MetroCog, and just to let you know a little bit about MetroCog and why we're involved in this project. MetroCog is the federally designated transportation planning organization for the Fargo-Moorhead metro area. So we specialize in transportation planning efforts and other such collaboration with our local jurisdictions here. And why 17th Street? Well, 17th Street is a collective roadway on the federal functional classification roadway network. And so as such, we are able to utilize federal funds for this corridor study, and also if any federal funding is used in the potential with the roadway work in the future, then that would come through us. And then also just maybe I'll briefly discuss funding, and we'll touch more on that too. But I know that's a big question that we've seen from the public and especially from property owners along the way. And so as far as the funding of the project goes, there is a scheduled mill and overlay project, which would be asphalt resurfacing in the year 2022. And so that's been in the works for the city for some time to have that occur on 17th Street. That is to ensure the longevity of the roadway. And because of with that mill and overlay project, that would avoid much costlier projects in the future. Kind of, for example, like if you get your oil changed in your car, it's cheaper than never getting your oil changed on your car, and that then your engine would have to be repaired and cost a lot more. So anyway, as far as the mill and overlay cost goes, that would be the plan would be for that to be assessed to the property owners along the corridor. However, any other additional amenities to the corridor, improvements along the corridor would not be assessed to the residents along the corridor. So just wanted to make that clear at the beginning here, and we'd be happy to answer any questions in the future. Any of those additional things would be through the general fund, state funds, or possibly federal funds. There is a frequently asked questions on our webpage, and I'll just add that into the link, the chat box in Zoom. So you all can take a look at that if you have any further questions. So I'll just leave it at that as an introduction.
Thanks, Dan. And that's a good transition to talk about the Zoom features that attendees will see. So you should have 3 buttons that you can use on the Zoom software. There is the chat feature. So we encourage you to use that anytime during the presentation to make comments or ask questions, or you can let us know if you would like to be unmuted, because we do have that option to unmute attendees so you can actually speak to us without having to type in your comments or questions. There's also a raise hand button, and that feature is really for more urgent needs. So if you have a comment or question or having technical difficulties, please click that button and we can kind of pause the presentation and address your comments that way. And then the Q&A or question and answer button is for anytime during the presentation, and then we will be using that one primarily at the end for our Q&A session at the end of the agenda. But we encourage you to use that Q&A to ask any questions throughout the presentation, and we can answer those during the presentation as well. And I'll copy that information into the chat feature just so you can see how it works. You know, we're pretty far into our pandemic. We're probably all pros at the Zoom, but it's always a good idea to just copy this information in there. And with that, I think we'll throw it over to the consultant to give the presentation. I forgot to mention that this will be on Facebook Live as well. And so we will be monitoring for comments on there. So if you are participating on Facebook Live or watching on there, please just type your comments into Facebook, and the project team will be looking at that. Excuse me, I'm having some technical issues. The project team will be monitoring Facebook as well to answer your questions directly on there. So with that, I will throw it over to Bolton and Mank to get us started.
Maybe while Jim's pulling that up, we could give John an opportunity to introduce himself. I see he just joined here.
Oh yeah, thanks Connor for noticing that. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jonathan Atkins. I'm the city traffic engineer, and I think this should be a very good project. So I'll turn it back over to the guys.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Are we good? All right. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We're going to talk a little bit about the 17th Street, this virtual open house format, and we're going to talk a little bit about the corridor study as a whole. One of the basic background pieces of information that we wanted to do is, as we start to introduce the corridor here a little bit, you know, 17th Street North corridor study, we're going to be examining all corridor characteristics along 17th Street. This project runs from 1st Avenue North to 15th Avenue North. And one of the unique characteristics of this roadway is its width. It has 140 feet of platted right-of-way and 60 feet of curb-to-curb pavement. This dates back all the way to its original platting in 1882 that provided that distinctive width. And for the purpose of our examination, we've also broken this corridor up into 2 separate segments. That first segment represented on the left of this image from 1st Avenue North to 4th Avenue North, and then a segment 2 is from 4th Avenue North to 15th Avenue North. Segment 1 is depicted in this photo. It's home to commercial operations like Burger Time, Stenerson Lumber, DS Beverages, along with the private school, Park Christian School. And this section of roadway is characterized by a 3-lane road section, center turn lane, and on-street parking. And then also worth noting is that this section does not currently provide any bicycle or pedestrian facilities that would connect the neighborhood in the northern corridor to these businesses or other businesses downtown, for example. Segment 2 is the next segment going north, going from 4th Avenue North to 15th Avenue North, and it is primarily home to residential land uses. There is Moorhead Manor at the north end of the corridor, an assisted living facility. The existing roadway consists of 2 lanes with on-street parking, wide boulevards, and it also includes a pedestrian facilities, pedestrian sidewalks. It's also home to the MAP bus Route 4 that travels north along this stretch. And prior planning efforts like the Metro Bike Ped Plan in 2016 and the Metro Transportation Plan called for a future bicycle route along 17th Street North that would connect the existing shared use path just north of this picture, just on the bottom of this picture here on 15th Avenue North to an existing on-street facility at 2nd Avenue North. So this project, a little bit about the project scope. At the onset of this project, we conducted an extensive review of the existing conditions of 17th Street. We performed an in-depth analysis of those existing conditions along the corridor, including traffic counts, looking at travel speeds, movements along the corridor. We examined crash data and safety for all modes of travel. We also examined the sidewalks for ADA compliance and gaps in existing pedestrian facilities. We looked at local bus routes. We spoke to MAP Bus about their requirements for Route 4. And then we've also examined some infrastructure and found evidence of drainage concerns along the corridor. We've taken into account the social and economic conditions along the corridor, as well as the environmental conditions. A large portion of our time thus far has been spent speaking to the public as well and gathering that input. We obviously know that it's very important to hear from you folks. And then going forward, we're going to be preparing a final report and providing those funding options. So the project goals, these goals were developed in coordination with our study review committee, and also we brought this to the initial public engagement period. And our top priority, as always, is to safely accommodate users and safely accommodate all users from vehicular travel to the freight users at DS Beverages and Stenerson Lumber, MAP bus users, like we said, neighborhood kids riding bike or walking. Our top priority is always to safely accommodate all users and then allow them to move as efficiently as possible. We also want to develop a financially responsible plan. And what does this mean? We're not only looking to develop project alternatives that are low cost in implementation, but we're also looking at low cost for maintenance. So the existing roadway at 60 feet curb to curb, like we said earlier, is relatively expensive to maintain compared to comparable roadways. Paving, seal coating, removing snow, all of these maintenance activities are significantly more costly. So in the example of snow removal, we've heard from Public Works that it takes about 4 plow passes to clear this one residential section. Comparing that to a typical residential street that's half its width, we're talking double the effort. We're also aware that the implementation costs, that narrowing this roadway, bringing the curbs in to make this road narrow would necessitate regrading the road and likely replacement of the existing storm sewer, creating a much costlier project. So we wanted to ensure that we are preserving the economic vitality of the region as well, ensuring that the businesses have adequate access. We've talked to these business stakeholders. We've talked to them about their access and how they use 17th Street, how their trucks get in and out of each facility. We also want to ensure that any proposed improvements are environmentally compatible and fit in the natural and built environment. So our initial engagement period took place in the month of August. And as I said, we brought together the study goals for the comment to hear from the people what the goals should be for this project. We also brought together a toolbox of different implementation solutions. We posted this both on the project website, MetroCogs, and we created our own project website that facilitated a lot of the engagement pieces. We also provided a study announcement that was mailed out to the people that lived adjacent, and emailed updates for those people that subscribe to emails. We conducted that business stakeholder roundtable that I mentioned earlier. We also provided online surveys, goals and objectives, improvement options, as mentioned. We also mailed out surveys to those that requested them. We sent out stamped postcards in a larger mailing during this engagement period that allow people to return to request paper notifications to fulfill an engagement requirement for those that may not have internet access. We also used an online open house format. We conducted a video, and we've implemented what we will get into a little bit later, which is Input ID, which is an online mapping comment platform. So what did we hear during this initial engagement period? We received 183 survey responses, and some of the comments we've heard, obviously with 183 responses, we've heard a lot of comments. We heard, utilize the expanding boulevards here by adding a shared use pathway, keep it straight and cleared and in the winter by the city, keep the cost down. Some kind of art in the median landscape would be awesome. There is a time and place for roundabouts, but this street is not the right time or place. We took in a lot of these example responses, and you will see that reflected in our alternatives that we've developed. The top priorities that we've heard from the public were adding lighting, adding pedestrian lighting and roadway lighting, connecting the sidewalk network, so making that southern connection, developing safer crossings, adding landscaping and street trees, and maintaining on-street parking was a common theme for this project. How are we going to get to those alternatives? Again, we proposed this toolbox approach. We provided a series of alternatives that people were to consider, and these were the feedback that we received, different types of options. As you can see, roundabout, for example, did not score highly, but a landscape median did, so you will see that reflected in our corridor improvement options. We've also heard a lot about pedestrian safety and pedestrian facilities, so you'll see that reflected as well. As we take the next step, obviously, we're going to be talking about the corridor alternatives that we have developed. And for that purpose, we've configured this application called Input ID. This is a custom application that allows us to work through these different alternatives that have been developed. But I want to introduce this briefly to everyone on this call, as we will be looking at this later, as well as Connor walks us through the alternatives. But I do want to show examples of how a resident or business owner can comment. Simply toggle through the different alternatives, and then you can provide a comment here based on your comment type, and you can type these things in. Just so you're aware, names and emails will not be provided to the public, but you can provide comments to us on these different alternatives and submit them for the group. So fill out the information and hit submit. So this is a useful tool for you to provide comments, and then this interactive feature allows us to like, dislike. People can also comment on the comments. So please provide comments using this tool. If you have any questions, please let me or anyone on the study team know. And with that, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Connor Cox with Tool Design.
All right, thanks, Jim. I'm going to share my screen here shortly. And what I'll do is walk through the different alternatives that we've developed here. If someone can just confirm that you can see my screen, that'd be great. All right. Thanks, Jim. So the project team has already sort of provided some background on how we've looked at this corridor in two different segments. So segment one on the south end of the corridor between 1st Avenue and 4th Avenue, and then segment two on the north end of the corridor north of 4th Avenue. So we've approached the concept alternatives on a segment basis as well. So the first The first thing I'll do is walk through segment 1 on the south end. We have 2 different concept alternatives that I'll discuss, and then we'll take a break and pause for any comments or questions on segment 1, and then after that I'll move on and talk about segment 2. So Jim already talked about the excessive pavement width. That's one of the kind of very distinct features of this corridor at 60 feet from curb to curb. Another sort of distinct feature of the south end of the corridor is the land uses. You can see there's a lot of businesses and Park Christian School here. So we took all of these things into account as we are developing these alternatives. This south end, of course, is very different than the north end, which is primarily residential. So if you haven't been on Input ID yet, as Jim mentioned, you can toggle back and forth between the different concept alternatives on the right side of your screen here. So what we're looking at here is alternative 1A, and I'll just kind of talk about some of the key features, sort of do a high-level overview of each of these, and then we can dive deeper into any questions after I go through these. So zooming in here, the key differences between this alternative 1A and the existing conditions that you'll see out there on the street today is that we're connecting the sidewalk network. So we're adding a sidewalk on the west side of the street that connects all the way from 4th Avenue and then all the way down to First Avenue. And then on the east side of the street, we're adding a wider shared use path. So a 10-foot path that would accommodate people walking, people biking, kids that are traveling to the school, kids that might live in the neighborhood. So that's a shared facility that can be used by anyone except for motorized vehicles. In terms of the street configuration, the existing street, we kind of maintain the existing configuration. We have parking on both sides of the street, drive lanes in each direction, and then that center turn lane. All of the existing dimensions of those lanes have remained the same in this option. One of the things that we heard from stakeholders, I believe Jim alluded to a stakeholder meeting that we had during this project with DS Beverages and the school, as well as Steenerson Lumber. But one of the things that we heard from them is that they do like the way that the roadway functions now, and they like keeping parking on both sides of the street for school buses to drop off students or for trucks to wait, things like that. So we wanted to make sure that we were listening to those comments and reflecting that in these designs. I'll move on to alternative 1B. So this option, zooming in here, also has a sidewalk on the west side and a shared use path on the east side. The key difference from this option as opposed to alternative 1A is that we're adding an on-street bike facility. So we have a buffered bike lane in each direction on the roadway. We are still maintaining parking on both sides of the street, that center turn lane, and of course the drive lanes. The way that we're doing this is just by narrowing the existing lanes. So the parking, the drive lanes, and the center turn lanes all get narrowed up a little bit. The lanes out there today are very wide, and so we're able to narrow those lanes each a little bit to come up with enough space to add the on-street bike lanes. So I just wanted to mention that it might be a question that folks have is how do you add bike lanes without changing something else or widening the street. So that's how we're doing it. I should also mention that just a general comment about the scope of the project. We talked about this being a mill and overlay project. That's sort of a routine reconditioning project that the city does periodically. What's important to know about that is that we are not looking at changing the curbs, so moving the curbs in or out on the street, with the exception of at intersections here. If we were to look at moving the curbs in the mid-block areas, that would be a much more expensive endeavor, both in terms of reconstructing the curbs, but also needing to move utilities and that sort of thing. So just in case that comes up, that was sort of one of the things that we had to work with the designs for each of these. Just a couple other things I wanted to point out for both of these design options on alternative segment 1, excuse me, is that we're adding marked crosswalks at all of the different legs of the intersections here. We heard from many different people during the first round of public engagement that safety of pedestrians or people walking was a top priority for the corridor. So adding crosswalks that provide more visibility to people walking was an important piece of that. Another feature that you'll see in both of these, as well as some of the options in segment 2, is that we're adding what we call curb extensions. And so what that is that the street actually bends in, the curb bends in at the intersections. And it provides a couple of different key safety benefits for people walking. One is that pedestrians are able to sort of move out closer to the street, which means that they have more visibility for people driving. So as they're getting ready to cross the street, drivers can see them easier, and it's safer because they're more likely to see them and stop for them. And then the other key feature of that is that it just shortens that crossing distance for pedestrians because curbs on both sides of the street are shortened, so the overall distance is much shorter. So I think that was sort of the quick overview of both of these alternatives in segment 1. And before I move on to the alternatives in segment 2, I kind of wanted to open it up for any comments or questions that folks might have, either here on the Zoom platform or on Facebook Live.
And Connor, it looks like we don't have anything yet, but we'll just pause for a second to see if any roll in here. Facebook Live, it looks like there's no comments yet, so I don't know, just give it a couple more seconds, and feel free to use that raise your hand feature too if you would just like to use your microphone to ask your question as well.
Luke and Connor, there is a question in the regular chat. Will there be flashing lights on the crosswalks?
No, right now, none of the designs feature any flashing lights or anything of that sort, just the marked crosswalks. Any other questions we're seeing come in, or if any of the project team members have anything they want to add about these alternatives in segment 1, feel free to mention.
Connor, maybe I'll just mention one other maybe benefit with those bulb outs at the crosswalks would also be to calm traffic down as far as traffic speeds too. I think that's safe to say on these and for the north segment.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's another key thing that we heard from folks is that speeding vehicles on the corridor is a major problem, and study after study will kind of prove that when you narrow a street, whether it's physically narrowing it or visually narrowing it by adding street trees or some other feature, that's proven to get people to slow down, to drive slower. So when we add these curb extensions at the intersection, it narrows up the road at that point, and people do drive slower. So yeah, that's a good point, Dan.
Yeah, Connor, before we move on to segment 2, I just had one other thing that came to my mind as we went through this, and you'll see on the northern segment, we included the curb extensions on the cross streets as well. However, in this segment 1, so both at 2nd Avenue and 4th Avenue, those don't have any curb extensions on the avenues. That is due largely to the amount of truck traffic that is turning onto and off of those streets, as well as school buses. Whereas on the northern segment, we don't have that same type of movements. So we can include those extra extensions on the cross streets as well on the north segment.
Yep, thanks for pointing that out, Cody. If we're not seeing any other questions come in here, I can move on to segment 2. We can always go back to this too. We'll have sort of a more general Q&A at the end of the presentation. So I'll move on to segment 2. As I mentioned, segment 2 is everything north of 4th Avenue. And it's largely characterized by single-family residential homes, with the exception of the assisted living home, Moorhead Manor, on the north end. Maybe just before I kind of get into the design concepts, I'll make a couple general observations or notes about the existing conditions of the corridor, things that make this this unique. Segment 2 has the same existing street width as segment 1, so it's 60 feet from curb to curb. For a residential corridor, that's incredibly rare to have a street that's that wide. And it does have some safety implications with speeding. It also has, it's a lot more expensive to maintain, not just because of the width of the asphalt itself, but also the ongoing maintenance that's required. I think Jim might have mentioned the snow plowing in the winter time, so it requires 4 different passes by city snow plowing crews every time there's a snowfall. So those are things that maybe some folks don't think about when they first look at a street like that, but it definitely has an impact on the city's budget. So finding ways to reduce maintenance budget was a key consideration of these designs that we're going to go through here. The second thing that's very unique for the corridor compared to other streets is how far the sidewalks are set back from the street. You can see the boulevard space is very wide here, and that is just really unique for any residential corridor, and I'll talk about the implications that has at intersections in a little bit here. But with that, I'll kind of talk through the key features of each of these alternatives. So with segment 2, we have 3 different design alternatives. So starting with this first one here, we're calling alternative. Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you zoom in as far as possible? Just it is a little small on Facebook Live, especially.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. Yeah. So this is alternative 2A. The existing conditions that are out there today, there's parking on both sides of the street and then 2 drive lanes, 1 in each direction, very, very wide drive lanes. The alternative 2A here is maintaining the drive lanes and the parking on both sides of the street. We heard from residents that on-street parking was important, so that's something that we maintained in all 3 of these alternatives. What we're doing here, though, is adding on-street buffered bike lanes. So this is really just about reallocating the pavement space. In other words, we're striping bike lanes and then this buffer space here, but we're still maintaining the travel lanes and the parking lanes while adding that dedicated bike facility. As we mentioned earlier, the intersections also have marked crosswalks and then curb extensions. Those are both on 17th Street itself, as well as on the cross streets. And that's primarily, again, for those pedestrian safety benefits. In terms of the sidewalks remain completely unchanged on this alternative. The only thing that might change is the curb ramps at intersections. As part of this, we'd be recommending upgrading all the curb ramps along the corridor so that they are ADA accessible. Some of them out there today are not, or they're just in poor condition. So we'd be adding ADA accessible ramps and these marked crossings. Another thing I just want to note generally is that the design of the 4th Avenue intersection is sort of contingent upon whatever is chosen on the other segment. So we won't know what this looks like until both segment 1 and segment 2 have a preferred alternative. So I just wanted to mention that. As we're transitioning between different facility types, that might look a little bit different if we have to transition from an on-street facility for biking to an off-street path, for example. I'll move on to alternative 2B. So as I mentioned, a couple of the key goals for the study, as well as things that we heard from the community during our first round of outreach, was that speeding is a major concern along the corridor. So we want to make sure we can design the roadway to slow vehicles down. And then, of course, reducing that existing pavement width so that it's easier and cheaper for the city to maintain. This option 2B that I'm showing you here, a couple of the key features here is that we're adding a median in the center of the street, a landscape median that would have street trees and grass. And then we would be adding a shared use path on the east side of the street that would connect to the shared use path that is proposed on the east side of the street in segment 1. Apologize, that's kind of zooming in and out here on me. I'm not sure how to control that. So the shared use path would continue along the entire corridor. It would go all the way up to the north end, in which it connects to an existing shared use path up here on 15th Avenue. It's not shown in the aerial here, but there's an existing shared use path. So the design would transition from the east side, cross over to the west side, and then cross 15th Avenue so that it makes that safe connection to the existing facility there. Couple things to note, or questions that folks might have is that, if I live on this corridor and say I live on the east side and I want to drive south, I can't drive through the median. So how does that movement happen? We did look at turning movements along the corridor. So we looked at making sure that a passenger vehicle could make a U-turn to turn around. So that has been sort of incorporated into the design of this option. I think that's sort of a high-level overview of alternative 2B. So I'll move on and talk about alternative 2C. You'll notice that at first glance, alternative 2C looks pretty similar to 2B in that we have the same landscape median in the center of the street. The key difference between alternative 2B and 2C is that we do not propose a shared use path on the east side in alternative 2C. Instead, we propose having shared lanes for bikes and cars and leaving the existing sidewalk on both the east and west unchanged. So the intersection features are the same again as 2A and 2B with the curb extensions and the marked crosswalks. Just the key difference is that shared lane facility for cars and for bikes. So you'll note that we have parking preserved on both the west side and the east side in all of these concepts. With that, we can again open it up to any questions on any of these three alternatives on segment 2, or if any of the project team members have anything to add, feel free to speak up.
I will say that for landscape medians like this that have grass in them, that would fall to our Public Works or Parks Department. They would add that to their mowing list. That would not be a responsibility of the adjacent homeowner to take care of those.
Luke or Dan, are we seeing any questions come in on Facebook?
Nothing coming through, no.
No, not yet.
And as I mentioned, we are going to have sort of a broader discussion period at the end of the presentation. So feel free to type in any comments or questions into the chat feature, and we can discuss those at the end of the meeting as well.
Yeah, Connor, I would just add, we talk about, trying to reduce the amount of pavement to reduce the maintenance costs for the city, be it, roadway rehabilitation or snow removal. The easy answer seems to be, well, why don't you just pull in the curbs and make the road narrower that way? That we obviously we looked at that. It's not really that feasible with the flat grades that exist, along the roadway as well as in the yards behind the curb. Pulling that in would create a large drainage issues that we'd have to deal with behind the curb. So that's why our concept to reduce the pavement turned into this median option.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. It looks like we did receive a question in the Q&A. How wide is the parking lane and driving lane? And I'm with the median options. So that would be for 2B and 2C.
Yeah, I don't have the cross sections in front of me right now, but I believe they are 10 feet, or sorry, 9-foot parking and 11-foot drive lanes.
For fire access for the trucks, we need to maintain in one-way direction a minimum of 20 feet. For plowing, in order to be able to use the wings that are on the plows to make a single pass northbound and a single pass southbound, they requested 22 feet. So the overall width face-to-face here is 22 feet. And then that allows for a 9-foot parking lane and 11-foot, like Connor said. The narrowest that we would do a parking lane would be 8 feet. Standard passenger car width is about 6, and that's what you see in more congested areas would be 8. But since we have the room here, 9 feet does make sense.
Any other questions coming in? I'll just mention too that this study is sort of what we call a planning level study. So some of these details like lane widths or curb radii, those things can certainly change if this project were to move forward. It's nothing is set in stone in terms of some of those geometric details. If we're not seeing any other questions yet, I wonder if it makes sense to throw it back to Jim. I'll stop sharing my screen here and can pull up the presentation.
All right.
All right. So I earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that one of the kind of distinct features of the segment 2 is that the sidewalks have such a deep setback from the existing roadway, and due to that, there are some safety challenges for pedestrians at the intersections. And I'm just going to kind of walk through that. What you're looking at here on the left side of your screen is the existing conditions. So that is the alignment of those sidewalks along 17th is what they look like today. These drawings are showing adding marked crosswalks, which are not out there today. But what the fact that the sidewalks are set so far back from the street create a couple pedestrian safety challenges, as I mentioned. The first one would be that if a pedestrian is walking along 17th Street and they're crossing the avenue there, crossing that way. Their visibility to motorists or cars that are driving along 17th is not very good because they're set back so far from the intersection. So if a car is making it that right-hand turn like that, they may not see those people that are walking, and it could be more dangerous for folks. The other safety concern with this is that a car that's traveling along the cross streets actually has to drive through the crosswalk before getting to that stop sign. That is sort of, I guess, atypical for most residential streets. Usually the stop sign is going to be in front of the crosswalk. So that's safer for pedestrians because cars are stopping before that crosswalk. So one of the things, we noted that in our analysis of existing conditions, and we wanted to think about, is there an alternative that could make this safer for people walking? As we know, that was one of the top priorities for the public. So looking at the right side of your screen, this is another option that the city could look into. What this does is at the intersections, the alignment of the sidewalks would bend in closer to the intersection, closer to the street. And that would alleviate a couple of those problems that I mentioned earlier. You'll see that the placement of the stop signs is in front of the crosswalk so that cars aren't rolling through the crosswalk before they stop. And then pedestrians will also have greater visibility as they're crossing the street there and a car is traveling along 17th. They are closer to 17th Street, and so they're more visible to cars that are making that turn. So I just kind of wanted to walk through these two different options here. We have both of these on our online survey on the project website, so we're gathering feedback on those. So feel free to provide your comments there. If you have any comments or questions, you can bring them up now as well.
All right, and then as we go through these concepts and gather the public's input on these, the part of our analysis is going through this evaluation matrix for the different concept alternatives, as well as the no build scenarios. So what you have here is kind of our draft evaluation that will get finalized as we finish gathering input and coordinating with MetroCog and the City of Moorhead, as well as our study review committee. And so you can see we have the 5 goals that Jim went through early in the presentation about safely accommodating users, providing efficient mobility, the financially responsible implementation plan, preserving connections and economic vitality, and then providing infrastructure that's compatible with the natural and built environments. And you can kind of get a picture here of how things are stacking up to one another from an analytical kind of perspective, and looking at how those all could work. So for those of you that maybe can't see it as large as others, the minus or dash does not meet the goal. A 0 is minimally meets the goal. A single plus is meets the goal, and a double plus exceeds the goal. And so the darker the blue, the better the alternative addresses the goal. So you can kind of get an idea of how those are lining up against each other. And as we proceed, this, like I mentioned, this will get buttoned up and finalized and included in our final report, along with a breakdown of how these goals have been evaluated.
All right, so now we're going to just briefly spend some time talking about the project next steps. So as I outlined in the first engagement period, we stood up a project website that provided information on this project. We've also provided online surveys, mailed out surveys to multiple landowners in the region, and we've done an online open house, which is taking place right now, and input ID. And we also want to make sure that we offer that during this second engagement period that you can call any one of us, and we would love to hear from you and log any questions or concerns that you may have about this corridor. Just for a quick little update here, I did want to just pull up the project website that we have for this engagement period. On this website, which is linked on the MetroCog webpage, and it's been provided in a few other places, but we could probably drop a link in this chat. We also provide additional information here, including a summary of the engagement 1 and some of the background of the project. And then we also include these links for taking a survey and providing comments on the alternatives. So additional information about each of the alternatives that was outlined, that Connor provided that information. You can see that information here. And then you can also take our online survey right on this. And you can also provide comments, like we said, on input ID. So with that, our next steps, this engagement period is wrapping up, but we can extend this if necessary, if we feel that there's more people that need to engage. But we are going to be providing a preferred alternative in February of 2021 based on the report and feedback that we've heard from this group, and then the City of Moorhead and the Study Review Committee. And then we're looking to provide a final report in March of 2021. So with that information, we would like to turn it over to the members of the public that have joined on this call. And if anyone has any questions that they would like answered by the Study Review Committee, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, and I will say we have 3 minutes to spare till 5 o'clock, so we understand if people have to run. Feel free to type in a question anyway, and we since you did register for this open house, we can email a response to you, or simply check out the website as well as the survey, which are linked in the chat as well. But we'll stick around for as long as people want to answer any questions, or if you have any comments, feel free to type them in. Otherwise, thank you for participating. I'm not seeing anything. You stumped them, Connor. Thanks.
We'll give them a good 5 minutes or so because they need to think about everything they were told. It was quite quick there. So.
All right, it looks like we got a question up here. That's the question about medians here. I can just read it off. Medians on snow emergency routes are tough for plows to keep open. Parked cars and a median are very tough to navigate. I would lean toward option 1. We appreciate that comment. Thank you for the feedback, and I think we'll be able to record this comment. And if there's anything anybody want to add from the team on this, feel free.
Yeah, we have worked with Steve Moore on this and on the design, and I've got his input about plowing operations and what to expect out here. So we did make the roads wider. We do understand there are some challenges, but at the end of the day, there's just a lot of maintenance to be done out here, and we're looking to alleviate that. And then also the other piece is back to the bike ped public safety aspect, and also it's a neighborhood street, especially north of 4th Avenue, and we would like to have the final product on this project be much more neighborhood friendly and really drive that that feel to be more of a neighborhood feel versus it's a little industrial right now.
All right, we got one other comment here. I may be providing my input in the form of a letter on behalf of Partnership for Health. It says, to whom shall I address the letter? That is a good question. I've always wondered who best is to provide, let's see.
If it's in support of a particular alternative, Patrick, probably MetroCog, and then they can forward it to the study team. That would probably be the best way to do it.
Thank you, Patrick, for your question, and we'll look forward to a letter from you.
Connor, I believe you're on mute.
I see we also have a comment here from Leah Anderson. She said, thank you for trying to slow down traffic and adding bike-friendly lanes. Thanks for the comment, Leah.
And that brings up a good point. And I know Dan mentioned it earlier that all the comments that were shared today, we will log them and they will be included in our final report of all the public engagement activities that we've received throughout the study.
All right. Are there any final questions or comments out there before we maybe wrap this up?
Thanks, John. We will get that added to the video when we post this on the webpage.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm on Hollywood Squares.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can spice it up a little, John. That's a good idea.
All right. Well, if there's anything else from those on, otherwise about half the folks have left already. So
yeah. Thanks again, everyone, for being a part of this and taking some time to be on as a panelist or attend. And we appreciate all the feedback so far.
Likewise. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
thanks.
Yep.
See ya.